Good
Dr.
morning.
Sederer?
Good morning. Can you see me? Am I on?
Hey,
Yeah, there you are.
I can see you. How are you, sir?
I don't know if I can square the camera. Is it okay like this, or you want me full on?
It would probably be better if you're full on
No.
or close enough. Are you looking at your computer screen with your slides?
I will be. Yeah. The the problem is this is a government machinery, and it doesn't have a very long cord. Let's see if that helps.
Gotcha.
Um, that better?
Yeah, that's actually really great.
But I'm too much to the side, right? So let's see what happens if I put it here. There. Is that work for you?
Let me see. Yeah, actually, maybe could you just tilt it down just a touch? Like tilt it down. Yeah. See, that is perfect, actually.
Okay. It's not centered, but
Yeah.
maybe from time to time I'll try to look into the camera.
Yeah, no, but that's perfectly fine, actually. Are you in New York City?
Yes.
Where are you in New York? I lived there for the last 7 years, and I just moved to Switzerland.
To Switzerland?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
where? To Geneva or Zurich?
I'm in Zurich, actually. Yeah.
No kidding. That's quite a move.
Yeah, I lived for 7 years on 63rd and Broadway near Lincoln Center.
That's lovely. My office is 33rd and 5th, which my city office. That's where I
Oh
am
my
right.
gosh.
And I live
Yes.
in Lower Manhattan in Tribeca.
Yeah, amazing. I spent the last 6 months. I lived in Tribeca, just on the way out. I was on Duane, right near the courthouse, basically.
Yes,
But
Greenwich Street, a couple blocks north of Duane.
oh, I love it. I love Tribeca. Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's a lovely neighborhood, very residential. But
Yeah.
do you mind my asking what brought you to Zurich? And if you
Yeah, well, you know what? For the last 10 years or so, I kind of been splitting my time. Oh, our connection good? Okay. Yeah, no, for the last 10 years, I had kind of been splitting my time between speaking and my foundation and mental health advocacy, and then also doing television news. So I was a cable news political commentator, and just got, I mean, you know, every day I was at CNN and MSN, and I just got so tired of it, Dr. Sederer. I just got so burnt out of politics that, and this work was so much more meaningful to me. So I said, I'm done with all that garbage, and I'm just going to focus on the mental health stuff. And I've known Jacqueline for a while, and so we created a position for me and wanted to focus her or help her focus more on the global development aspect and connecting with some of the international health organizations and stuff. So, and I'd always wanted to live in Europe. I said, how about Europe? And she said, great. So that's how it happened. And you know, after
from the frying pan to the fire economically, I mean, it's very expensive in Switzerland.
Well, you know what? That is hilarious because it is just about as expensive as New York. It's less expensive than New York.
Right.
But, you know, everyone says it is so expensive. I said, but after you've lived in New York City, I mean, it's not that radical for sure.
Right.
Well,
congratulations on making the move, on the courage to take on the next big chapter of your life.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's the best decision that I ever made. So I feel very, very happy.
Right.
So yeah. All right.
German?
No, actually I spoke French. But as soon as I got here, I enrolled in a 9-week course, and I spent every day for 3 hours every morning in a German course. So I've completed the A level. And I want to go back and get my master's here in psychology at University of Zurich. So my plan is I need 2 more levels before I can do the master's in German. So I've always wanted to do a master's or study in another country. So I'm learning German.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So
I mean, if you were living in Geneva, you would just rely on your French, but
I know.
not there.
I know. And Geneva is a lovely city as well. And I will still keep my French, but I wanted to learn another one. I wanted to defy that American stereotype of making everyone else learn our language. So, yeah, so it's good. But I'm super excited to connect with you. As soon as we got you to do the conference, and then I read your bio and everything, I was like, oh, he's a New Yorker. That's so, it's an honor to have you. And really, really glad that you're a part of this. So thank you so much.
But you didn't hail from New York as a
No, I was from Michigan originally.
Because you don't have a New York accent.
No. Well, plus, you have to, for television, you have to keep it as non-accented as possible. But no, I was born and raised in Michigan. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So good.
Cool.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so we're recording, and what we'll do here. Oh, so I wanted to ask you then. Do since you said you use Zoom, are you going to screen share your slides, or?
I don't know how to do that.
Oh.
Do you have slides? Can you put them up?
Yeah, we can put the slides in, or we can provide them as well. Either one. I was planning on doing that all ourselves, but when you said that you used Zoom yesterday, I was like, oh, I wonder if he knows how to do that. But if you don't feel comfortable,
click the link.
Yeah.
Did you wanted to walk through? You saw the slides?
Yeah. Yep.
Can you orchestrate the slides?
Actually, you know what? I can do that. I can, because it's just a simple share screen function. And so if you just tell me when you want to go to the next slide, I can absolutely do that.
Yeah, let's do that. And that also permits us more narrative, which I think is important, more conversation.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Let me just go through and make sure we're all good here. I'm just gonna, there was a few, hold on one second. I love that, I love how many pictures you have.
Yes.
In your slides, because that is something that I've done a lot of presentation trainings for like clinicians, and they always have all these slides with like all text, like 8 bullet points of all text. I'm like, no, that's not. And I was like, this is such a wonderful,
I have another talk that is derived from 4 3-minute videos.
Oh, amazing. It's amazing. It's perfect. It's perfect. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Okay. Let me just play. Okay. So that's what I'm going to do. All right. Let me just minimize everything else here. Okay, so what we'll do though is I'll introduce you. I'm just gonna say your name and your bio. Welcome everyone to the conference. Say your name and read your bio. Oh, the screen just went fuzzy for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know why. I tried to adjust the camera a little. Let me make sure the connection didn't get, because it is a stretched connection. There.
Oh, perfect.
Better. It was the portal to the computer that was pulled loose by dragging the camera. Oh,
perfect. Can you see the slides now?
Very well.
Okay, perfect. So we'll just do that.
Great.
Okay. So not yet though. I'm gonna stop share. So I'll come on, welcome everyone, and then read your bio, and you can say hello, and then I'll bring your slides up. Does that sound good?
Great.
Okay, perfect. So, and we can edit this at any time, so we can just kind of start whenever. So I'll just do a.
Right.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Addiction Hope Virtual Online Conference. If you're just joining us for this session, welcome. If you've been with us all day, welcome back. We are really excited to begin our next session, and that is with Dr. Lloyd Sederer. He's going to be talking to us today about treating our dependence on opioids and other drugs. We're very honored to have him, and he's joining us from New York City. And I want to read his bio to give you a little bit of background on him, and then he's going to take it right from there into his presentation. So a little bit about Dr. Sederer. He is an adjunct professor at the Columbia School of Public Health, chief medical officer for the New York State Office of Mental Health, which is the nation's largest state mental health agency. And he's a contributing writer for Psychology Today, the New York Journal of Books, and the New York Daily News, among other publications. He has served as mental health commissioner for New York City, medical director and executive vice president of McLean Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts, a Harvard teaching hospital, and as director of clinical services for the American Psychiatric Association. He's published 12 books and has written hundreds of articles on mental health and addictions for numerous publications. So very, very glad to have him here. And we will turn it over to Dr. Sederer.
Well, it's great to be with you, and I admire so much the work that you're doing from an advocacy and educational point of view, so it's a privilege to be with you.
Absolutely wonderful. So I'm going to bring your PowerPoint up here on the screen so that everyone can see it. And there we go. Oh, we have Mr. Churchill there. All right, there you go. All yours.
So this is the cover slide. It's got my information, but the title is Our Dependence on Opioids and Other Drugs, because it's not just opioids in this country and in other countries, it's psychoactive drugs, drugs that impact our brain, that affect our brain and change the way that we feel and think. That has become an epidemic in this country and other countries, and my approach is that of a public health doctor. I'm a public health doctor, and this talk is going to have three parts. The first part is going to talk about why we're losing the war on drugs, why we're failing to actually reduce the death rate, particularly in this country, which continues to escalate from opioid and other drug overdoses. The second part is going to change the focus a little bit and take a look at we human beings, the way that each of us is an active ingredient in our response to a medication or a drug. It's not just the drug, it's the drug and the person. That's the second part of the talk. And the third part of the talk will be solutions, because there are solutions. We need to get to them. They're proven, and I will outline what those are. Go to the first part of the talk, why we're losing the war on drugs. And here, Winston Churchill, I think, summed it up well. You can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. And we continue to try everything else when we actually have increasing proof that everything else doesn't work and that there are solutions. So let me just say what that everything else is, because it continues to be a drumbeat in this country. So next slide, please. So the approaches that have been very popular for a long, long time can be summarized as control, trying to interfere with a person's access to psychoactive drugs, to burn crops, border interdiction, arrest people with undercover agents on the street, et cetera, et cetera. These are control techniques, and they're notoriously ineffective. And then the other approach that continues to be popular is consequences, which is basically scare tactics. And I want to talk about both of those. So from the control point of view, if we can just go to the next slide. This is where we now stand. This is a headline from a satirical newspaper that the drugs have won the drug war. Why have they won the drug war? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the war on drugs, this is a term that was coined by Richard Nixon when he was president. And it actually had a lot to do with him winning the South by targeting people of color and hippies. But he launched the first major international and national campaign, which was basically arresting people or burning crops or doing border arrests, et cetera, et cetera. That was his war on drugs, and that's what he called it. It didn't work then. Reagan picked up on that and actually redoubled Nixon's efforts with even more South American subterfuge to try to destroy crops and to war with the people who were producing drugs or distributing it in this country. And wars involve armaments when you think about it. And you might think that this is a photo taken from some Far Eastern country where US forces are invading some insurgent compound. This is actually a photo taken in a small city in the American South. And these are a local SWAT team that is about to make a house arrest on an alleged drug dealer. And look at their armaments. They have massive firepower. They have Humvees. They have these powerful rifles and guns. Where did they get those? Local towns can't afford them. But the United States, the federal government has expiration date on all of its armaments. And when their armaments expire, local police can requisition and get all of these for free. And that's what's happening, so that when the war escalates, we have more weapons than the bad guys, the dealers have more weapons, and there's been increasing loss of life, not just of people who are selling drugs, but police have now been shot and killed during these busts. The war on drugs doesn't work. It's never worked. The best example, perhaps, of that is prohibition. Remember that? Prohibition was an effort in this country to illegalize alcohol, and it failed utterly. And it left us, though, with one enduring institution, the mob, which took off during that time, because the more you try to interfere with access to what people want, the more the underground community will satisfy that. That's the war on drugs. Another effect of the war on drugs is the next slide, please, is the incarceration that has gone on in this country. So we have over 2 million people in this country in prisons and jails, principally from nonviolent drug offenses. And when you look at the demographics, who are these people in jails, particularly nonviolent criminals? They're people of color. So the war on drugs disproportionately impacts people of color, poor people. That's another consequence. In a way, it's a sort of a hidden form of racism. The war on drugs never worked. Next, and then the second strategy, what we just add on, that there has been a resurgence of belief in the war on drugs in the current presidential administration, where they want to arrest the people with marijuana in states where it's legal, maximum sentences, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not an idea that we've outgrown. It's an idea that continues, and it's never been successful. The second strategy is to scare people. And these are posters from before even my time, but probably from the 30s. And these had to do with scaring people about marijuana, about cannabis. The devil's harvest, this is going to destroy your children, and so forth and so forth. And these scare tactics continued and became a school program called the DARE program. You may have heard about that, where schools would invite the police in uniform. Sometimes they would bring a felon with them, and they would try and scare the kids. This is what's going to happen to you if you use drugs. The irony is that the adolescent brain is wired for risk and adventure. Think about it, evolution, from an evolutionary point of view. Tens of thousands of years ago, the adolescent, particularly the boy, needed to leave the home, go forage for new sources of food, find a different mate. So the adolescent brain is drawn towards risk. It's drawn towards adventure. And when we try to scare kids, we put this stuff up. What does it do? It draws them towards what we're trying to scare them about. So control and consequences, control and scare tactics have never worked. Next slide. Okay, so now we're at the second part of the talk. And here, this is moving away from what we continue to do that's not working to understanding better that there's more going on than the drug, that human beings are active ingredients in how we respond to a substance, whether it's a poppy or cannabis, methamphetamine, doesn't matter, alcohol. And I want to illustrate that with a number of examples of what are the principal drivers of a person's response to drugs, because these are also opportunities for making a difference, for prevention, but there are also ways by which we can better understand and reduce the stigma, because these are persons taking these drugs. These are not drugs taking the drugs. So next slide. Some of your viewers may recognize this lady. This is Billie Holiday. And Billie Holiday arguably was one of the best jazz blues singers in this country. And she was born in Baltimore. Her mother was a street prostitute. And she grew up on the streets of Baltimore, essentially, in that kind of awful, violent environment. When she was 10, she was raped, and her screams brought the police. And the police arrested her, thinking that she was a prostitute. And she spent a year in juvenile detention. That was her first criminal conviction. She got out of juvenile detention. Her mother moved to Harlem. She followed her mother to Harlem. Her mother went to work in a brothel in Harlem, in Northern Manhattan. For those people who may not know Harlem, but it, back then was more or less exclusively the Black community. And she and her mother refused to take her in. So Billie became homeless at about 14, and she had no means of support. She became a prostitute herself. A few years later, she was arrested again, this time for prostitution, not for being raped, and she was sent to Shelter Island, which is a predecessor jail to what we now have as Rikers Island. These are awful places. And she did her sentence there, and the first thing that she wanted to do when she got out of jail was to get as far away from her experience as possible, as far away from rape, from incarceration, from domestic violence, from streets of violence, and drug use and abuse in her own home. And she first turned to high-potency alcohol and very soon to heroin. And heroin became her partner through the rest of her life. She became a heroin addict, never kicked that habit, and died when she was 43 from complications of alcohol and heroin use. Billie Holiday. This is what we call SET. SET is the internal environment, the psychological predisposition a person brings to their encounter with a drug. And if we could just go to the next slide. And nowadays we call these adverse childhood experiences. These are the traumatic experiences that children have when they're young, 3, 4, 5, neglect, abuse, domestic violence, foster care, active drug abuse in the home. These are all called adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and they're additive. That if a child has 3 or 4 or 5 of these, by the time that child is a teenager, they're apt to be addicted to substances, to smoke tobacco, to have early pregnancy, to trouble with the law, mental illness. The trauma produces a psychological set and a biological set, a stress set. But these are called adverse childhood experiences, and Billie Holiday is perhaps a poster child, a sad poster child for adverse childhood experiences. That's the set. So if we have an internal environment, we have an external environment, and this is called setting. The way in which our social circumstances, our lives, predispose us or protect us from getting dependent on drugs. And this is a photo from about 1971 in Vietnam. And these were our soldiers in Vietnam. And at that time, the Department of Defense got wind of the fact that the soldiers in the jungle, combat soldiers, were heavily using heroin. And they became concerned. We had over 500,000 soldiers in Vietnam at the time. And they became concerned that they would bring their heroin habit back to the United States, doubling the heroin using population in the country. So they assigned a drug expert, a doctor named Norman Zinberg, to go to Vietnam and to answer two questions. First, what's the prevalence? What kind of use of the soldiers what kind of use of heroin is going on with the soldiers? And the second, if he would predict whether they would bring home their heroin dependence to the United States. And he found that 1 in 5 soldiers were using high potency heroin, cheap, accessible, 3 to 7 days a week. They were dependent on heroin, 1 in 5. And that's at least 100,000 men at that time. And but he predicted that they wouldn't bring the addiction back to the States at that rate. And he said that's because of their setting, the circumstances in which that they're living. They don't know, they don't know whether they'll be dead or alive by evening. They don't know who the enemy is. They're living in this hot tropical jungle they don't understand with a war that's unpopular. These were their circumstances, and these are circumstances that one soldier described as wanting to make time go away. That's what heroin did for these soldiers. They didn't bring back the heroin use at 20%, but they did bring it back at 12%, which was higher than the general population. But he made his point that social circumstances and what we call now social determinants of health and mental health are powerful drivers in how a person turns to and experiences drugs, setting, interior and exterior. Another really big factor in our response to drugs is age. And cannabis is a really good example. It makes a big difference whether somebody smokes cannabis when they're 12, when they're 20, or when they're 30. And this is a graphic of how our brains mature. Our brains mature by putting this myelin sheath, a sort of fatty protein sheath, around the connections to the nerves. And what that does is enables the brain to communicate better and function better. And the brain is continuously under construction into our 20s. We're myelinating into our 20s, longer for young men than for women. The message here is that exposure to cannabis, which is 60 times more potent than the stuff I smoked when I was in college, is exposing a brain under construction to a high potency drug. And if you have any vulnerability to a mental disorder, family history, or social circumstances, early exposure of potent substances is a very big risk factor. And it's resulted in families now increasingly messaging to their kids, because cannabis is ubiquitous, to say, hold off for as long as possible, hold off till your brain is better constructed, and then, do what you may. Age is a big factor. Next, route of administration is another big factor in how we respond to human beings respond to drugs. And what do you think the fastest route of administration maybe I put you on the spot. What do you think the fastest route of administration to the brain of a substance is?
Yeah, it's going to be the bloodstream.
Well, everything has to get to the brain by the blood, but what's the what's the method of administration that you think is the fastest to the brain?
Injection? I would say injection.
Yes, most people think that, and it's completely understandable, but the answer is inhalation.
Ah, interesting.
Q is here. And when you think about the anatomy of the body, if you inject into a vein, the substance passes up, goes to one chamber of the heart, to the other chamber of the heart, into the lungs, and then from the lungs up to the brain. It's very fast, but it's not as fast, and the hit is not as powerful as inhalation. And this explains the difference between coca leaves, which are chewed for a lifetime without dependence, crack cocaine, and cocaine and crack cocaine. Crack cocaine was inhaled, and it became an epidemic. Fastest way to the brain is by inhalation. And some people think that the reason cigarettes are so hard to kick is because of inhalation, because of the rapidity and powerful effect of inhaling nicotine into the brain, route of administration. Next. So there are a number of other factors. I outline them in my book on addiction, but one of them I want to talk about because you as individuals, you as clinicians, and as citizens may have something to say here, and that's the composition of the plant, particularly cannabis. So cannabis is on the march to legalization, recreational legalization throughout the country. And not that every state will, but I think we're at 8 or 9 states. In DC, we're recreational. New York State is going to have recreational marijuana. And the marijuana that is grown now is genetically modified, which means that it's bred to be more potent, and that a particular element in the actual plant called CBD. So THC, we know that's tetrahydrocannabinol, that's what gets us high. But CBD, and that's often 60% of the plant, but 20, 30% of the naturally grown plants is CBD, and CBD is neuroprotective. It prevents some of the anxiety and psychotic reactions that people, particularly vulnerable teenagers, can have to cannabis. So the CBD is being bred out. You can buy in some shops, dispensaries, 90%, 100% THC. This is a mistake from a public health point of view, because if youth particularly, but not youth alone, are going to use THC, you want to buy stuff that has 20 or 30% CBD. This is called harm reduction. The composition of the plant is another big factor in terms of how we humans respond to substances. Okay, that's the second part. The third part of the talk is about solutions. And as a public health doctor, I've seen and been part of responses to a variety of epidemics. We've seen how we've beaten back some very global epidemics, polio, smallpox. We've seen how with a groundswell, we got HIV/AIDS under control. We've reduced driving deaths. We've reduced tobacco deaths. These are the ways that a public health approach is effective, and that's not what we're doing now with the opioid and other drug epidemic in this country. And a public health approach starts with prevention, moves to screening, early detection, and then to good intervention. So next slide. So prevention. Prevention is obviously the most successful approach of all, because it's about reducing children, youth going on to using substances or putting it off for as long as possible. And there are actually 2 examples of this that are proven highly effective and almost used nowhere. The first is called life skills training, and you can find this online. And it's a curriculum where different for different grades, where children are not scared. They're taught skills. They're taught particularly decision making. So, for example, a kid in 7th grade, friend comes up with a joint, says, hey, it's lunchtime, and the kid is muddled about this and pressured. But a kid who can think through, well, I've got practice at 4 o'clock, I've got a test tomorrow, a kid who can consider his options. This is decision making, and none of us is born with very good decision making. So this is about training kids in decision making and helping them modulate some of their impulses and some of their feelings. This is a proven technique done in schools, but schools have to do it. It's not our mental health community, it's about school curriculum. The other is a long-standing program, Big Brothers, Big Sisters. So if you have an older person from the same background as you who takes you under his or her wing, this is highly protective in terms of kids getting in trouble with the law and substances. Prevention. The other, next slide, please. The other element of prevention is with families. And here's another program that also is a skill-based program for parents. None of us are born skilled parents. I certainly wasn't, and it was my son who had to teach me how, off my approaches were. And it is about positive communication. It's about learning to find what your kids are doing that's good, supporting it in every way. This is a skill-based technique as opposed to being hard or tough on your kids, which drives them away. So prevention works with families, and it's about creating family cohesion. Obama, when he was president, when he was in the White House, he had dinner with his 2 daughters and his wife every evening at 6:30. No texting, no TV. This was about creating the cohesion of the family. Grandma was sometimes there. And it was about prevention, another form of prevention. So these are low-tech interventions that will make a difference for the legion of youth ahead in terms of the drug epidemic in this country. So prevention. Next slide. Screening is, I'm going to pass over that, but it's no different from doing blood pressure screening or sugar screening in primary care. It's about detecting these problems early and intervening early. But I want to emphasize and have all of us walk through this schematic of the brain. This is a little oversimplified, but this is a graphic that we're encouraging doctors, young doctors, residents, fellows, young doctors, to use when they sit down with someone with an addiction and they sit down with the family of someone with an addiction, because it demonstrates the areas of the brain where there are opportunities for intervention. So when we start, they look at the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens. These are regions in the brain where we experience pleasure. These are our reward centers. This is where the dopamine hit happens. And it ignites a circuit in the brain. But these are the reward centers. And these are where particular kinds of medications like Suboxone, well, I'll come back to that, opioid agonist, ones that serve to reduce craving, ones that prevent response. These are the sites where that medication-assisted treatment works. Then another section of the brain, the orbital frontal cortex. This is believed to be the area where our motivation exists. This is about having the experience of, hey, I really like that. I want more of that, where motivation to repeat exists. And we have techniques now, very familiar in the addiction community, called motivational interviewing. And it's hard to understand, but let me, if I can take a moment to give an example. Woman, late 20s, goes into her pediatrician's office with her 6-year-old son, and he has, once again, a recurrent ear infection. And she sits down in the consulting room, and the pediatrician is there, and the pediatrician starts to look at her and says, you know, I know you're a smoker. Don't you know that smoking is associated with ear infections? Don't you know you're making your kids sick? And meanwhile, the mom is squirming in her chair, can't wait to get out and never come back to this pediatrician again. That is not motivational interviewing. That's the opposite of motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is where the mom comes in and the pediatrician is talking with her and says, tell me some things about your life. Oh, you're a single mom. You have a full-time job. That must be very hard. When you come home, there must be a lot that just sort of falls on you with your child. How do you cope with all of that? And then the mom says, well, usually I smoke cigarettes to cope. And the pediatrician then says, I can understand that. I can understand how you would want to smoke given your circumstances. And that's when the motivational tipping point is achieved, because then the mom is more apt to say, I know it's not good for me. I know it's not good for my child. And then the pediatrician can ask, what would you like to do about that? That's motivational. Then we have the prefrontal cortex. This is the site of reasoning and judgment, such as it is. And this is the brake. If this was the gas, this is the brake. And this is where, so motivational interviewing is an intervention here. A brake is about enhancing our cortical control over our behaviors. And CBT does that. But support groups, 12-step groups create the support for people to be able to control their behaviors. Prefrontal cortex. And then finally, the amygdala and the hippocampus. These are where we encode memory. And memory is not eidetic. Memory is encoded by what is salient, what feels strong, like a sight, a sound, a smell, a taste. And with addiction, the principal drivers of relapse are exposure to triggers, like seeing a friend calling who's high, walking past a bar, Prince dies. These are triggers, and the ability to alter triggers is very well accomplished by cognitive behavioral therapy. So we can reduce relapse with relapse prevention groups that particularly are cognitively skill building. So when we're talking with somebody who wants to see to it that their loved one or themselves gets good treatment, comprehensive treatment, this is what we're saying, that just a reliance on NA or just a reliance on medications, that's not enough. But when we add all of these sites of intervention, we get a much more robust response. Someone's much more apt to live, survive, and enter recovery. That's comprehensive treatment. That's what we have to advocate for. It's very hard to get. Two more concepts. These are Latin terms, but they're popular today. A simile, a similibus curantur. That means like cures like. And this is about the peer movement. This was about the start of AA in the early 30s, that a person who's affected with a condition is the person that's apt to help cure that another person with that condition. Similia, similibus curantur, and that's in the addiction community and now highly important in the mental health community. The other is spiritus contra spiritum. And this is taken from a letter that Carl Jung wrote to Bill Wilson, one of the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said that spiritus, that spirituality is necessary to fight spiritum, to fight alcohol, to fight spirits. And that became the other foundation. Peers and spirituality, faith, became the essence of the recovery movement and has continued to this day. And faith plays a very big role in whether, not necessarily organized religion, but faith plays a big role in who recovers or not. Next. So I want to take a moment here because we have now very effective medications. They're not without their problems, but they're the difference between whether people stay alive or die after an overdose or when they're in severely addicted states. The old dog here is methadone back from the 60s, but buprenorphine, Suboxone, that was introduced in 2002. And Suboxone is a very safe drug because it has a ceiling effect. You can't get too high, and you can't depress your respirations so that you have to stop breathing alone. If you mix it with alcohol, pills, and so forth, yeah. But buprenorphine is the difference between whether somebody enters detox and leaves in withdrawal and goes back and gets a fix, or has something that keeps the craving down and enables them to get into recovery. The other I want to focus on are naloxone, Narcan, which has been used for a long time. It is the antidote to an opioid effect on the body, particularly somebody stopping breathing. And this is used by first responders, but now in many cities, counties, this is being dispensed to families and to friends of people who are addicted because somebody is apt to have a needle in their vein and to pass out and stop breathing. And this is a nasal spray now. It doesn't even require an injection, and it's immediately effective. You need more of it for some of the highly powerful opioids now, like fentanyl. But naloxone, and in New York State, you can buy naloxone at your pharmacy without a prescription. This is a lifesaver. And the other is a medication called Vivitrol, naltrexone, which is a 28-day injection that reduces craving. It made its reputation in alcoholism, but it's got very promising anti-craving effects for opioids as well, because these are antagonists. These act on those areas, the reward centers. These block the reward centers, and these satisfy the rewards. The agonists satisfy the reward centers, the antagonists block. So we have this treatment. This is the difference between life and death, and it's hardly being used, medication-assisted treatment. Next. And one more, because people use drugs because they serve them, not because they're bad or because they're weak. People use drugs because they reduce their physical pain, they reduce their psychic pain, or they just transport us away from the everyday grind. So we have to encourage people, and there are many alternatives. But there's one very promising drug that's that I want your viewers to keep an open mind to, and that's a psychedelic, and it's called a psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and it's a naturally growing mushroom in the Southwest and South America. And some years ago, it was used to intervene with now 500 people who were facing imminent death, and they were in extreme distress about their dying. And they were given one trip, sometimes two, with psilocybin in a controlled environment, and 80% of these people went from being in terror about their death to being reconciled to their dying, understanding the continuity of life, the universality of life. This is an amazing intervention, and it lasts. It's not just during the drug. It lasts for 6 months, a year afterwards, and we don't have any other intervention, any other treatment where one dose has a persistent effect. And of these 500 people, none of them had bad reactions to the psilocybin, zero. So that's a high safety standard, and so this has led now to research underway. Is psilocybin an effective agent for tobacco addiction, for bad depression, for OCD? We'll find out, and for opioids, psilocybin. So these are alternatives, and it's not addictive. Lastly, next one. This is
Sorry about that. Go ahead. I'm not on the screen. I'm just letting everybody look at your beautiful face. So no worries.
I saw what you had reason to pause. So this is about understanding stigma, which is often how a person comes to dislike themselves, hate themselves for their addiction. But as clinicians, as people, as families, we have to watch out for implicit bias, what's called implicit bias. We may say, oh, we understand addiction is a disease, but we don't want any addicts in our office, right? And they're going to cheat us, they're going to try to manipulate us. This is implicit bias, and as if clinicians didn't have addicts in their office, people with addictions in their office. But this is implicit bias, and this is really important because if a person seeking care has a sense that the caregiver or the family thinks no good of them, they're not going to go because they're already ashamed as it is, implicit bias. So lastly, and this is, I think, the shameless slide. Yes, so this is the shameless slide. This is the book. If you like these stories and the history and solutions, all of this is taken, all my talk is taken from this book that came out in May of this year, The Addiction Solution. Scribner is my publisher, and proud of all that I've learned, which I've tried to impart here today.
Wonderful. Well, I just stopped our screens share. Dr. Sederer, thank you so much. So much helpful information there, and we really thank you for being a part of our Addiction Hope online conference and illuminating us. Really, really wonderful to get your wisdom. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And again, my privilege, and keep up the great work. If I can be useful to you, again, don't hesitate.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, wait, okay, don't go. That was my official wrap up. Sorry. We're going to edit this video. We'll edit out the front conversation and edit out the end. So that was my official goodbye. So, yeah. So sorry about that. Yes, I forgot to tell you that I put you up in the screen. I took myself out so that people would just see you in the PowerPoint. So,
okay.
So that's why, sorry, I had a guest over, and so they were in the other room. So I had to let them know, yes, we're almost done. So I apologize for that.
No apology needed. And I didn't know, but that's, even if you were on the screen, it seems like you brought in a little precious commodity when you came back. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's always, and always, I think too, and when I've done these before for other groups and stuff like that, it's always nice to feel like at least you're talking to someone and you're not talking into a black hole. Yes. So that always makes it a lot more engaging. So that was really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And again, great work. And please don't hesitate to be in touch again. I hope this series is a huge success.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we do too, for sure. And of course, we'll send you, all the info day of and all that if you want to tweet it out or send it to your followers or whatever. And whenever you interact with someone on our social media, it's me. So I'm the one tweeting at you all the time.
Okay. Good. So send me the link and I will do my best to distribute it as well.
Will do. Okay. Thanks so much for all your great work.
Congratulations on your new life.
Thanks so much. All right. Bye-bye.